Today I'm going to talk about estate planning. So what is estate planning? It is really a process of taking the necessary steps for protecting the growth and distribution of an individual's assets for the benefit of his family. In fact, there are three essential elements to estate planning. First of all, there is conservation. Secondly, there is accumulation. Thirdly, there is distribution. So what does conservation mean in this respect? It means whatever wealth, whatever properties, assets which the client has built up must be preserved, must be conserved for future generations. And secondly, it's not just maintaining what he has attained so far, but continuing to grow, continuing to build on his assets. So that's the second part, accumulating further assets. And thirdly, there is the distribution aspect. In other words, the client starts to think about how best to pass on his assets to his children, grandchildren, and other relatives, and so on. He needs a long-term plan of making sure that these assets, which he has built up so painstakingly, are passed on in an efficient manner, in the manner in which he wants it to be passed on. It is said that there are 6 steps to estate planning. So going through them one by one. First of all, the client's objectives must be ascertained, must be established. Secondly, to gather all the financial information of the client so that a proper planning can be done. Next, to analyze and evaluate the client's financial situation. In other words, all the information which was gathered in step 2 must be analyzed to see exactly where the assets are, in what form the assets are, the current status, and so on. Fourthly, formulating a strategy by using proper planning tools to make sure that the client's objectives and goals can be met. Step number 5, develop and recommend the plan for approval based on all the analysis and strategy planning which has gone before. And finally, the 6th step is to implement the planning, implement the objectives, implement what has been agreed, and then set up a review process to make sure that as time goes by, the objectives are being met, continue to be met, and are met in due course. So let's look at the steps in a bit more detail. An individual will have specific needs and objectives, and these may include providing adequate income for dependents, preserving the family legacy for next generation, making sure that there is sufficient liquidity to pay for any tax liability which may arise on the death of the client, providing for future educational funds for children and grandchildren, arranging for business continuation programs through the provision of buy and sell agreement. Another requirement may be, another objective may be to provide for a favorite charity, and also the overall objective, as mentioned earlier, is the the preserving of certain sentimental assets for future generations. With regard to the second step, if we look at it in a bit more detail, which had to do with the gathering of financial information. The information, as I said, would be in respect of assets and also obviously liabilities as well. So let's look at the different types of assets. Now, they cover there are liquid assets, immovable assets, movable assets, business assets, and intellectual properties. So liquid assets would be something like a current bank account. Immovable assets would obviously be something like a house. Then there are movable assets such as cars, jewelry. Business assets would be something like sole proprietorship interest, goodwill in a business. Intellectual properties would be some things like patent rights and design rights. So moving on to step number 3, which is the analysis and evaluation of the client's current financial situation. The estate planner needs to be able to examine the different types of properties owned by the client and the ownership rights in respect of them. In other words, the depth of ownership. An estate planner must understand the difference between different types of properties, such as real and personal, tangible and intangible. Okay, the difference between real and personal property. Real property is made up of land and interest in land, while personal property is everything else. With regard to tangible and intangible, tangible is something that can be physical in nature, whereas an example of intangible would be something like trademark or even copyright patents. There are different forms of ownership in addition. Now they include outright ownership, life interest, contingent interest, joint tenancy, and tenancy in common. Outright ownership is quite clear. It's an ownership which is free from any restriction. Life interest would be where the beneficiary has a right to say the income from a property throughout one's lifetime. Contingent interest would be, for example, there is no immediate interest, but it may arise in the event of the death of the owner or on the occurrence of a particular event. Joint tenancy is where two or more people own a property jointly, and if one of them dies, then the other partner becomes entitled to the full property. Whereas in the event of a tenancy in common, if one of the partners dies, then that partner's interest passes according to his or her will or any other document he has left behind. Moving on to step number 4. This means formulating the strategies by selecting the planning strategy, in other words, by selecting proper estate planning tools. So what are these tools? These tools include will, trust, a power of attorney, deed of assignment, nomination. A will, for example, can be used to transfer assets to intended beneficiaries on the death of the client. A trust, on the other hand, can be used to transfer benefits while the client is still living. Power of attorney, it's a method by which the donor can authorize another person to act on his behalf as an agent. A deed of assignment is a tool where the property can be assigned for a particular purpose and bind the assignee in a particular way. A nomination, now we're familiar with nomination in the event for Provident Fund rules purposes. So simply by filling in a nomination form, one can pass on the benefits under the fund. With regard to business continuation planning, a standard agreement can be made which covers a buy and sell agreement. Life insurance planning, policy may be written under trust so that it falls outside the distributable assets. The advantage of that is in the event of there being a will, the probate has to be sorted out, and if this policy is written in such a way under trust, then it doesn't have. There is no need for a wait as far as the beneficiaries are concerned. The 5th step involves developing and recommending a plan for approval by the client. The plan needs to include a summary of the client's personal and financial details. It must contain the goals and priorities already agreed, and there must be an explanation of how the tools such as wills and trusts, etc., are to be used. The charging structure, as far as the planner is concerned, must also be included in that. And finally, the client's authorization to proceed with the plan needs to be present in the plan. Moving on to step number 6, which has to do with the implementation and setting up of a review process. This is obviously the final step, and the step must include how to record the different documents which have been executed, such as the buy and sell agreements, trust deeds, so how and where these documents should be kept and filed and so on. Any regular communications must be maintained with the client, and if there are any changes in regulations in the future, they must also be recorded and brought to the attention of the client and checked to see if this has any impact on the plan already agreed. So we have now looked at the different steps involved and also the fundamentals of estate planning. The fundamentals being, first of all, having a process by which the client can be assured that what he has accumulated so far will be sustained, will be preserved. Secondly, to help him to continue to grow his assets. And finally, to ensure that whatever he has accumulated so far can be passed on to a new generation, to the next generation, in an efficient and orderly manner. So we'll stop there for today. Thank you.